May 31st in the year of 2012. This is YUI Open Hours, and Eric Ferriello can't be with us today because he's out at Backbone Conf, and there's Fluent Conf and Backbone Conf going on at the same time, which was unfortunate scheduling because good stuff from each of those. I understand that Fluent Conf has, well, I've actually watched some of the streaming stuff coming out of Fluent Conf, good stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing some videos hopefully out of Backbone Conf as well, and um, out of that's not what I wanted. Uh, Hopefully see some videos out of Backbone Conf and get the report from Eric in terms of what kind of interesting new hotness is coming out of there. His talk sounded pretty interesting. So let's see. And Jay, you were saying that, oh, I'm sorry, I should introduce you. Jay Shirley is with us today. We're going to be talking about the project that he embarked on to fork Twitter Bootstrap to use YUI3 under the hood, which is pretty cool, actually. There's, I think, an interesting future for this. So. But we were also going to have Juan DePazzo on, and apparently he's had some scheduling conflict or something where he's likely not going to be able to join us.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah. Let's see. Can everyone hear Jay all right? You sounded a little bit quiet. Maybe you can up your mic input.
I can. Is that any better?
Yes. Good, good, good. Okay. So let me think. In terms of business, we have code freeze for 3.6.0 PR2 next Friday, which means there will be PR2 available in the following week, so right around the 11th or 12th, June 11th or 12th, I believe is what that's scheduled for. Followed by PR3 on July, I think 18th. I'm not entirely certain about that off the top of my head right now. But let me think. Any other business going on that needs attending to? If something comes up, I'll interject it, I suppose. But so let's just get started, I suppose. So Twitter Bootstrap, I'm assuming that most everybody on the call already knows about it, but for those that are actually watching the recording later on, Jay, do you want to give an overview of that project, its scope and goals and those sorts of things?
Sure. Essentially, it's just a very good toolkit to get started, and it also contains a lot of JavaScript components to do common behaviors that you'll see in web applications. And one of the things that's really nice about Bootstrap is that it's very easy to override. And we've started to use that and wildly changed the way that it looks, but we still get all of the scaffolding and its sensible defaults. The JavaScript, however, screen flickered on me. That was odd. The JavaScript, however, is in jQuery, and it doesn't use semicolons. And when I was trying to use it, it got in my way a lot. And I thought, well, that's not the YUI way, because one of the reasons why I like YUI so much is that very rarely do I ever go, get out of my way. And so the obvious answer then was to fork it. And we really needed to do that because we were bootstrapping our applications, and we wanted, when we're just putting up some quick page, we don't want to have to write JavaScript for that. We want to be able to use the data API. And I'll quickly go through some of the widgets that it has here. And if anybody hasn't seen it, you can get it on twitter.github.com/bootstrap. That's the official version. The names are a little different than what you would think of as far as YUI widgets. The modals, that's just panels, paneled with modal true. Tooltips are an overlay that are styled. They're actually very pretty. They're one of my favorite. The collapse is an accordion widget that just scales and grows, except again, it's based off of data attributes, and so there's these triggers. So you say, well, I'm a link and I'm going to expand this other one, and they can be part of a container. So you can say when this expands, collapse everything else in my parent container. So you get the full accordion or just a single collapse, and I'll demonstrate that. Drop-downs are a menu nav, the node plugin where it'll drop down, but the markup on that is quite a bit different. Popovers are sort of a combination of a tooltip and the panel, where it has header content and some buttons. Really a throwback to the iPad little flyout menus. Carousel is exactly what it sounds. Scroll Spy is a pretty cool thing that you'll see as you scroll. Actually, this is mine. I don't have Scroll Spy set up yet. That's one of the in-progress ones. But as you scroll through the page, it emits events that say, I have passed this point, so you can highlight different navigation
Locations and things
elements.
like that. Yeah.
The alert messaging is very useful. I wish more sites would do stuff like this, and that's one of my favorite parts of Bootstrap, is that it just gives you a very nice style for alert messaging, and then also a close functionality where you could just say and then dismiss the alert, make it go away. Type ahead is autocomplete. I took a little bit more liberty with type ahead than the others because the YUI autocomplete is so richly featured that it would be a shame to not do that. And I'll demonstrate some of the other stuff with that later. Toggleable tabs, toggleable. Um, the Bootstrap tab view is just a very basic tab container that you would expect without putting a lot of thought into like the ARIA and the accessibility. This one has probably given me the most trouble, and I'll go into that one a little bit later when we go through the the way that TabView is built is very accessible and it works very well. However, it was very difficult to extend. The functionality that's in Bootstrap is very basic, but going forward, we'll need to fix that up quite a bit. Buttons are exactly what you would expect. They are buttons. They also are not fully completed yet. In the version that we're pushing out, I don't think that we have any button support in there, such as toggle buttons. When you depress it, it stays depressed, things like that. So that is it for the the overview of the widgets.
So
Luke, do you
when
think
did
that
you
we should?
start? When did you start working on this?
Um, it's probably about 3.5 weeks ago, I think. We made the decision to go ahead and just bootstrap stuff. The first cut was, well, let's just rip out all the JavaScript and then port over our JavaScript to use that markup. And then we had a couple pages that came up where it didn't make sense to write a bunch of custom JavaScript because the bootstrap stuff worked. And I flat out refused to start using jQuery after I fought so hard to get YUI in here. And so that started the effort of just writing a very thin compatibility layer that really did nothing other than some very brain dead parsing. And so then I forked that off and made it a little bit more formal. But that's been the path.
Hmm.
So my notes on this, the motivation that I had was to really keep that spirit of Bootstrap, where you don't need to write JavaScript to get these effects. That doesn't need to ever happen. You just include it, and then this stuff just starts to happen. But I don't want that to be a deterrent from writing good quality JavaScript. And you can still do that. So Bootstrap has the plugin API using jQuery plugins where you can operate off of selectors and whatnot. And I've changed some of those so that they work off of like delegation. So if you use the Bootstrap containing object, then it says, okay, well, delegate on this selector and then plug it in automatically. And so that's actually worked out really well. Some of the stuff doesn't. The expandable is all DOM based, so it synchronizes its behavior based off of the DOM. It says, oh, well, I'm supposed to be uh, collapsing this element over here, and right now its state is expanded, so I'm going to inverse that state, and it doesn't do any synchronization. The reason for that is that you can have multiple controls that are expanding or collapsing the same target, and so it has to look at the DOM for that to be able to maintain that. Um, So that's kind of outside of the way a lot of other YUI widgets are, where they manage their state internal and they don't look at the DOM after the initial HTML parsing. Uh, I prefer the YUI way. I think it's the better way of doing it because it seems more programmatic and you can easily say, well, are you expanded or are you collapsed? And you get an authoritative answer. But it kind of runs counter to the way that the Bootstrap, it's based off of these data attributes and markup goes.
Yeah, that's interesting. You think about where are you going to be storing state. You can either store store state in data attributes in the DOM, or you can store state in JavaScript objects. And I guess my gut reaction to that is if you're storing view state, then maybe it's fine to store it in data attributes. But if you're storing data state in some way, then you would want to do it on the JavaScript side of things. But uh, since you'll be interacting with those things in the JavaScript layer anyway, then why don't you just store it in the JavaScript layer, I guess.
Right.
Seems like
So
there are too many points of access to, if you have state on a node, then what you're doing is you're exposing that node. Well, that node is by its very nature in the DOM tree and therefore exposed to all sorts of different access methods. So navigating through child nodes, navigating through query selectors, or and just navigating through the DOM tree at all, and you have this uh, and through inner HTML and all sorts of things, you can effectively change the state of something just by messing with a DOM node.
yeah,
When it sort of it can fall out of sync with the JavaScript side of things. Because maybe that's just a problem either way you look at it.
one of the things that Juan and I were discussing was that really collapsible is two different widgets. It's a control to say I collapse something else, and it should have a state unto itself, but then also the target is another widget that says I myself can collapse and expand. But then you can expand that out. Well, then you have the group of them that can expand and collapse because right now with the way that the Bootstrap stuff is that it has a parent level selector for that group. So if you have the accordion control, I'll show that right now. Uh, so it can kind of go a little bit crazy where you start having like architecture uh, parties and that stuff just gets a little bit difficult because having something that's very simple to collapse and expand makes sense to a user who just has to look at it. Um, and oh dear, I forgot to change that. That should be a wide open. Uh, I have failed.
That would be an interesting thing, wouldn't it? A jQuery plugin to allow YUI plugins.
The uh, the plugin code is similar enough in spirit that that didn't cause me a lot of issues. The a lot of the stuff that I ran into was either the jQuery stuff not doing as much, or it just looks at the DOM and says, okay, let's just do our thing there, or it was just missing semicolons. The one thing that I will say that the jQuery code did very well that I always struggle with YUI, and I'm not sure if it's a limitation of YUI or myself, but it's the calculations of where stuff is happening or how big something is. So with the expandable control, when I was trying to get the calculation of how big is my inner element, jQuery has a simple command for calculating that, and YUI I couldn't get anything that actually matched what the jQuery result was. And I eventually got it working, but it seemed like I was doing something wrong for quite a while. Because having a simple accessor that's like get my actual height is nice. That's about all I can say nice about jQuery though.
All right, whoever is messing with the the little modules in Connect, just so you know, it changes how it looks for everybody. I had a feeling it was you, Derek. So
Oh, so there is a gallery module for getting no dimensions. See, it was a limitation of myself.
There you go. Scratch your own itch. Um, so at this point, how much of the Bootstrap functionality is already ported over?
So everything on this page that is not working, I've tagged accordingly. So the modals they work. They're just a panel under the covers, but it pops up as you would expect. The jQuery version does a lot of sliding and animation. I haven't put that one in. Uh, if somebody wants to send a pull request for that, that would be fantastic and accepted readily. It's just one of those hard things to say that I'll spend my time on. The dropdowns, those work as you would expect. Pretty easy control there. And you can see that there's the different styles. So that one has that arrow, this one does not. And that's all just CSS that's part of Bootstrap. There's no extra code. It's all the same. Um, some of the examples I've skipped out, and as you saw, like I had the jQuery code in there. It's just taking the time to go through, and we have a separate app that is more of our usage that we're actually testing this against. So I don't look at this page as much as I should. So there's a lot of oversights, and oversight here. I miss tagging scroll spy, for example. Scroll spy, I haven't done any work on that one either. That doesn't seem like it's really part of Bootstrap at all in my mind, except for the fact that if one exists in the gallery, then we should automatically set that up with the data attributes. So you put this data spy on the body tag, and then it activates that control. The tabs, this is what I was talking about, where it's the syntax is and the markup is quite a bit different than what the jQuery version has. And the reason is that the YUI tab view that I wanted to use is so much different than what they had, and I really didn't want to give up using the features that the YUI tab view has. Unfortunately, and I'll go over into some code real fast. Rather than being able to just say, here's how I want you to parse the HTML, I had to create a pretty much a new tab view object and override a lot of things, the queries, the class names, the parsing. It used a lot of local variables, and I couldn't reach in and say, well, no, don't look at that string, look at this string instead. And all of this code that is in here is pretty much copied line for line out of tab view, but I had to make these changes because class names was a local variable, and I can't get in there and modify that. So if there was a way where the class names were a property or something that was easily managed, that somebody could just say, forget about your defaults, let me override everything, then I wouldn't have had to do this. I'm not sure what the philosophy or the sentiment or the reasoning for doing the local variable version of that. So somebody can tell me that there's a reason and that it's worth doing even when the outcome is having to write code like this.
Now I'm not sure about the tab view code. If it is what I'm thinking it is, it might just be might just be variable caching for compression. So generating the class names up front in private variables and then referencing those private variables throughout the code because it compresses better. But I'm not sure. John Lindell is commenting that he's filed a ticket for fixing this in tab view because he had to do the same thing.
It's funny,
So
I
John,
also filed a ticket, so.
oh, so John, incidentally, if you have a mic and you want to join in, I'll be happy to grant your voice if you want. So you basically had to re-implement TabView because there was all sorts of private reference or private variable references
Yeah,
that you
exactly.
couldn't access. Okay, so yeah.
But I was able to use all of the parsing and everything like that. So pretty much any method that just accessed the local variables, I had to copy and paste in here. Um, but that was really the only change that I had to make. Everything else worked. I don't think there was any other modifications other than that, and we get a tab view that has all of the Bootstrap stuff. So all of the Bootstrap CSS that goes into it to make that work went off without a hitch. So on one hand, it kind of failed my expectations, but then on the other hand, the end result was exceeding my expectations after I did the initial yak shaving.
Huh. So, but most of the widgets that you've dealt with don't have that. Don't
Correct.
have the pre-caching of variables. 'Cause they're all going to be referencing get get class name, right? The
Yeah,
specific class name for
I think modal I had to do. Yeah. This one I had to do some other stuff, but this was a two-part problem. The API is a little bit different with Bootstrap than what the YUI code is, as far as when it doesn't have that visible toggle. It instead has an in class, and so you add that in with other classes, and that determines behavior. So I had to make some very minor changes to show and hide, and oh, there was the find standard mod sections and the button parsing. But I was able to really just override the HTML parsers on this, which I don't think that I'd be able to get away with anyway, because the Bootstrap buttons are significantly different than the YUI 3 buttons. So I had to modify them on our so right here, that's what I was looking for. Once we find the buttons, then we can just push those in, and that all works as expected. I was having some problems with the class names, why there's so many y.logs in there, but I got that resolved. I am a console debugger and proud of it.
well, also y.logs get stripped by the builder, if you
Yeah,
care about
the
that. So you're saying that the buttons are different in Bootstrap from Bootstrap to YUI. I think Derek, if you have a mic available, you can comment on that in more detail. But are you talking about, Jay, are you talking about in context of panels or just buttons in general?
Well, kind of in general, but mostly in panels, the way that they were set up. We did some work to get them playing nicely together so that they still had all of the class names from YUI and the class names from Bootstrap,
Mhm.
and that just kind of got a little bit ugly.
Yeah, it sounds like that'd get pretty hairy on the CSS in terms of conflicting styles and
Well,
such.
when we did this work, we actually set fetch CSS to false, and
Yeah.
we explicitly pulled in all the YUI CSS that we would want, and
Oh,
and that saved us a lot of agony from importing something, because the other thing is that YUI 3 buttons doesn't bind its styling under the skin SAM selector. So if you use buttons and you don't have fetch CSS false, it will style your buttons even if you don't have YUI 3 skin SAM. Juan was pretty adamant that that was a bug
mm,
in YUI 3 button. I think he filed a ticket on it, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure that he did though.
okay.
Um,
And Derek dropped off, otherwise he'd be able to tell us. Okay. So, I guess when I think about the potential for a YUI3 fork of Bootstrap, it in terms of the markup requirements, are you modifying the markup requirements as well, or are you just relying on the existing markup requirements from Bootstrap? There
I
was a difference with tab view. Is there anything else anywhere else?
um, think that that is about it. I don't have the popovers done. Um, Everything else is kind of, it's been somewhat unique. The panels has its own markup, but it's it's fairly compatible. And let me scroll back up there because there's an example. Uh, the markup on a panel is modal header In YUI 3, it's like YUI 3 dash widget dash HD, I think, or
Mm-hmm.
dash panel.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really just saying, well, instead of parsing off of that, then just change the class names. And the panel worked fine for that. The um, to look at the list, I think that that's been about it. The type ahead example really didn't require any changes at all because that was just plugging into an existing input. The the styling on this is using the Bootstrap styling, but it's also integrating some of the YUI styling on that as well. The the part that I started to add in on this is that the data provider you say is a type ahead, but then I added additional data attributes. So the source you can put in a YQL query, and you can set up a text locator and a list locator, and this allows you to query YQL, which is not working right now. Oh, there it is.
Sure it is. Yeah, so the initial query against a YQL database is often slow.
So here you can see that that's fetching from YQL in an autocomplete. You can format the results and um,
So it's
get that
extracting
stuff
the
in there.
configuration from the data attributes on the
Yeah.
element. Nice.
So I think that that's going to be a pretty big win as this stuff gets used more, because if you can say, well, you have access to YQL and everything that it has, and you don't really have to write JavaScript, I think people are going to get really excited about that, as they should be, because that's neat.
Yeah. See. Has been okay. So Sartek says the configuration in data attributes has been very reliable for him. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with the addition of data attributes in markup. Broad support for that in browsers nowadays because it alleviates that tension of wanting to put configuration or something about your data layer or even your JavaScript layer to some degree. I mean, you could say that it violates the separation of concerns, but it definitely aids progressive enhancement insofar as you're more reliably able to specify what configuration is applied to what elements, and these elements in the DOM are going to be vivified in this particular way instead of having to ferret all of that out in JavaScript, um, up creating code to write JavaScript, and that can get a little hairy.
Yeah. The and going forward, the way that this would ideally look is that all of these things become uh, gallery modules that do everything in the purely YUI way. And
So
uh,
each of these is a gallery module?
they're not, but I really would like them to be.
Oh, okay. So that's just a
The way that
to-do item.
right. So I have a couple of them that are. So the tooltips, that is a separate module. The tab views are a separate module. Um, anything that was already on its own very much standalone is. And I've broken out the individual pieces into Gallery Bootstrap Miss, which is just as they're small and tiny. And this stuff isn't on the CDN yet, mostly because it's not very stable. We're internally doing a lot of extra work to it. When it goes into our master branch, then it's supposed to be pretty stable. It's at least past our review. And so you can see that it's all broken out into its own files. Like here is the modal code. The one thing that we did that I copied from the way that the Bootstrap stuff is that there is a defaults property, and when we create the new object, we actually just mix that together, and that becomes the configuration for that individual item. So you're able to go in and set the defaults globally by modifying uh, the I think it's the prototype is officially what that would be called, but and then everything instantiated after that point would then have that same configuration. So you can modify something globally before it's it's really implemented. And I thought that was a really cool way that the Bootstrap stuff worked, where people didn't have to crawl in and write a bunch of JavaScript for it. They could just kind of poke into an object and say, well, I don't want this to be modal, or I don't want them to be shown, or I want to change the height on behavior. The Oh, and actually, I forgot to bring something up. Looking at Juan's notes, the having that intermediary plugin that will expose the jQuery-like API, but then use a widget that is done in the YUI fashion,
Mhm.
and that acts as that gateway, makes it so that just by loading in that layer, you get the jQuery behavior. But then if you don't load that in, you don't get any magic JavaScript executing that you didn't explicitly ask for. So that's kind of
Uh,
my concern with Bootstrap.
I didn't follow that. Can you explain that again?
So uh, right now, the way that this stuff works is that just by using Gallery Bootstrap and having the data attributes, JavaScript is running on your page. So you have event delegation happening and listeners that are attached in, and you may want some of these widgets, but you may not want that uh, type of automatic uh, behavior being
Vivification.
installed. So we want to make that a little bit more explicit, so that you know that that's what you're getting, uh, and not just accidentally incorporating that because you go like, oh yeah, I want all the Bootstrap JavaScript, but you may not have really wanted it to start doing it. Because if you have multiple listeners on like the expandables, like let's say that you go in and you manually attach the listeners, you say I want this thing to expand, but you have the data attribute because you've been copying and pasting and not reading the documentation adequately, then you're going to click it, it's going to fire two events and immediately hide itself after you click it. And that's a bug that's going to drive everybody insane.
Yeah.
So the automatic stuff, if it's not deliberate, can backfire. So that's something that we want to get away from. The other one we've already talked about is the getting the classes kind of fixed up so that we can either just modify HTML parser when we're creating the Bootstrap version, or do other similar small little things rather than what we had to do with tab view.
But the general pattern though is that there is a there is some widget that represents each of these individual features, and then there is a separate plugin which attaches a node plugin that attaches that widget or associates that widget to that particular node as like the source node or the bounding box or whatever it would.
Yeah,
Right.
so the plugins would be that intermediary layer, and I've started to go down that path because if in the code here, um, actually modal uses panel under the covers here. So we're creating a panel that extends y.panel, and then the
Mhm.
plugin is designed to actually do that. The what this really should do, and if I were to write this again, I wouldn't have made the panel show and hide behaviors different as I did right here. I would have
Mhm.
moved that code down into this plugin so that all of the discrepancies between what the default panel is and the documentation would lead somebody to believe uh, that would be the same, but then just the Bootstrap plugin would have the Bootstrap API. So I've made a couple of the mistakes like that. A lot of this stuff was exploratory work. I'm not entirely sure how much of it will even survive to like a properly stable
Mhm.
version, but
Well,
I
yeah,
think it's
three
a good
weeks.
start and it's fun.
It's quite a lot to be done in 3 weeks, so you would expect that there's some craft and tech debt in there. So, but Tilo's asking in chat, and similar question, which is, what are the highest priority to-dos as of now? And that's related to a question that I had, which is, uh, what is your plan for tracking to-dos and facilitating collaboration with externals? Because obviously you and Juan have something going on, so that's great. But I know that there are other people that are interested in helping out. So how do you want to manage that?
The uh, I'm usually on IRC in the YUI channel, which works well for kind of that spontaneous communication. GitHub issues, I'm a huge fan of for anything. Um, one of the things that Juan has done, which I am also a very big fan of, is that just issue pull requests. Say, what do you think about this? We've had some pretty good discussions just talking about it. None of this stuff is being merged in yet, because it's just about discussion. It's about, well, what's the right way of doing it? I don't think that anything that I did here is really the right way. It's a way. So if you have a better idea, send a pull request with it. It doesn't really have to have code. It can just be some demonstration of the direction that you want to go, and get that discussion going. Um, I don't know if there's any other better ways to communicate on it. This has been working for Juan and I, but we're just two people. So if somebody has ideas, definitely let me know.
Well, I know that the pull request system works pretty well for us on the YUI team as well, and we obviously have more pull requests coming in and more people contributing to the code. So far it at least seems to scale
Right.
to that level. So that's promising. There's also the potential to add a wiki for any sort of details. But you have the iInteractive site that has documentation in a more formal way there. So not necessarily a wiki, but this is basically a copy of the Bootstrap doc page. So then
Yeah, we also have
the
been documenting as they come up here. So if you look at
yay.
our YUI3 gallery directory, we're using YUI doc and attempting to document as we go along. But this also has all of our modules that we're working on, not just Bootstrap, but everything with Bootstrap is prefixed with Bootstrap, so it should make sense.
Hmm. So I noticed that some of the code that you were showing for TabView specifically and some of the other modules that didn't have any inline API docs, but start by getting it working, I suppose. Is some people code better when they document as they write, and some people code better when they code first and add API docs later.
Well, the way that
Uh,
I wrote this was actually reading the jQuery source and kind of doing as I go replacement into YUI. And
hmm.
writing code like that does not lend to good documentation. Profanity, yes. Good documentation, no.
Not so conducive to writing inline docs. So then, what is your, do you have a plan to try to contribute this back into the formal Bootstrap project in some way? As in, here's maybe expanding the Bootstrap project in that it provides a default CSS and HTML layer, but the JavaScript layer you have options for. Or there's some, it sounds like
I
right now there are
definitely,
some incompatibility issues.
yeah. Well, right now the compatibility issues are isolated to TabView, which I think is reasonable. I think
Promising.
Carousel probably will have its own incompatibilities. I started on a Carousel module and it just went off the rails real quick because I couldn't get it to work with the Bootstrap markup, and
Mm.
I don't have a work scenario where I can actually use that one. So I shelved that one for the time being, and I'm hoping somebody who does have a Carousel widget that's using Bootstrap and YUI can come in and say, hey, let me write that for you. Um,
Mm.
but aside from those, there shouldn't be a lot of compatibility issues. And if the data API is the same, I don't know if Twitter would ever officially say like, yeah, hey, if you use YUI, then use this code versus maybe just a link over to this one. But I definitely am going to approach them and say, hey, what can we do to make this better? Because I don't think it makes sense for anybody to have vendor lock-in on something like Bootstrap.
Yeah, I guess I got the impression that the Bootstrap project it sort of took off on its own. It was just a thing that some of the guys there did, and I don't know how much they actually use Bootstrap at Twitter. I thought I heard that they don't actually use it at all, but it's just sort of a helpful project for web devs out there, and it makes sense for all of the jQuery developers, and because they're, Twitter's um, is a jQuery shop, that they start with jQuery as the JavaScript layer. But if the project has merit and has sort of a life of its own, then it seems like they might be amenable to uh, expanding the footprint to accept different libraries or different code implementations under the hood for working against the same markup in the CSS. I think it might be worth starting that conversation.
Yeah.
They use it a lot
The
internally. Use it, Derek. Okay, sure.
uh,
Okay,
so they have a really nice job queue system that's called Kestrel, and they didn't have any apps for monitoring how that looks, and so we took a quick little Bootstrap scaffolding markup layer. We used the I just started to put in some of the Y app, but we were using models and data tables to fetch statistics out of Kestrel, and that's all Bootstrap and YUI, and it was sent up to Twitter saying like, hey, here's something, and nobody nobody threw anything at us for using YUI with it.
hmm,
People were saying that it was very helpful and useful for them. So the
cool.
I think that in a situation like that, using YUI really made sense. We have the entire app hosted on GitHub. People can just load up the GitHub page and look at it, connect to a local Kestrel server, and it uses JSON-P, so they can get the information. They don't even have to clone the repository locally. It's just hosted by GitHub. So Bootstrap and YUI really came together very nicely for that. And because it's based off of gallery modules, then you know it's easy to lock into a version and relying on the YUI CDN. Although currently it's using my own CDN because it's using unreleased code. Will
Hmm.
change.
Yeah, but that will all change soon. So then I can't help but notice, but in the bottom right-hand corner, there's one big fat header that is not a link. So what's up with the transitions there?
Uh, this is part of their inconsistencies, I guess. I don't really
Oh,
uh,
that's
know
just
why
how it
they
is
did
in
that.
Bootstrap as well.
Yeah, it should
Not
be off to the aside, but the the Bootstrap jQuery code won't do transitions unless you explicitly include a JavaScript file for it. And I've just omitted that. I just use the transition module because it takes care of that for me, as far as I understand it. I just haven't removed that block of text yet. I probably will when I give this page a good once over.
Well, if there are any other questions in chat, or if someone wants to grab a mic or something like that, I'd be happy to turn it on.
The So to go
Read.
back to the I saw the YUI 3 to YUI
Yeah. Okay.
and the JavaScript with a little s. Um, yeah, so I was just going to go back to the what things I could use help with. Um, the things that I can most use the help with are the stuff that for the day job I'm not going to use or I'm not actively using, and so I can't devote time to work on that. And that is Scroll Spy and Carousel. All of our pages are much smaller than whatever requires Scroll Spy. Um, as far as architecture and design goes, if people just want to work with me, because that is kind of a priority, like I like to have good quality code under the covers. And in spite of doing all of this work, primarily I'm not a JavaScript developer. So there's a lot of stuff that I follow by example, and it probably isn't the right or the best way of doing things. So if people do have better ways to do it, send pull requests. So code review is very useful for me. Documentation too. If somebody just wants to go through and while they're doing the code review, just write some documentation up, that also is a big help because it's kind of hard to justify as a consultant. Like, yes, I bill you for writing documentation. Told other developers that don't work for you. Um, so a lot of the documentation is done after hours and stuff like that, which means that it's obviously at a lower priority.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Just to echo Derek and Reed's sentiments, this is pretty rad, and it sounds like it definitely has a good future, and it's in pretty good hands. And when we see it in the gallery, it'll be a hell of a lot easier to make all sorts of new things using using Bootstrap, using well, yeah, I suppose using the Bootstrap markup in CSS with APIs that you're more familiar with, and get the discussion going on for making things a little bit more explicit if you want to be
Yeah.
doing that with a little bit more control. And
One
I
of
really like the idea of having the individual gallery modules for the for the specific features, as well as maybe a gallery module that is the one that just activates the page or does the inspection of the DOM and does that magic for you. But yeah, so
one of the interesting ideas that Juan had, which I think would be really fantastic to see, but I'm not entirely sure how that would work. But to have a skin for Bootstrap, so
mhm,
just like their skin Sam, but to then include Bootstrap, so all of the elements are styled, but still using the standard YUI3 class names, but then just having it look like Bootstrap. I'm not
mhm.
really sure how how good that would be, because I don't think that Bootstrap on the default looks like something that everybody should model their applications on. If they have no design skills whatsoever, it's better than nothing. But having that as a skin could be useful, and some people probably would be able to make good use of that. So I thought that was a pretty good thing. He also wanted to ask how he could contribute large patches to transition and anim.
And Matt is not here, so I don't have a very good answer for that other than issuing up pull requests and engaging that conversation in the pull request discussion section, just like what he's doing
Okay.
with you.
The
But okay,
uh,
so
I do
any
have this
last
on a
little
CDN
things?
for myself that anybody can use. And
Okay, so your CDN is also public. You're willing to share.
yeah, let me. That's the root. At yui.shirley.im, and then probably also on this Bootstrap page, I'm going to have a link for that on the config. If you look at the source of this, it will actually show you where this code is pulling from. So if you look at the source of that page, you'll be able to see the configuration that I'm using. And I'll formalize this up so that if anybody is interested in just poking at it and exploring how it works without running their own CDN, uh, then they can use this file, and I'll link to it correctly. Thank you, Derek. That would have been a much smarter way of doing it. Um, but this is what I'm using for testing. I am moving my testing away from our internal test app that has all the controls that we use to the Bootstrap page finally. So there will be a lot more changes to that. I'll make sure to change YUI3 to YUI, and any other nits that people have, I will accommodate your complaining.
Squeaky wheels. All right, well that's fantastic. Uh, I look forward to seeing this growing and stabilizing and getting all sorts of good contribution out there, and hopefully being a catalyst or facilitating the spread of YUI3 via familiar means of folks that are excited about Bootstrap. They don't have to be excited about Bootstrap in isolation with jQuery, and so that's good for the broader web dev community in general, I think so. Fantastic. I'm really excited about the work and really glad that you took that on. I think that's really awesome. So
It's been a lot of fun to work on, actually.
cool. All right, so I guess we'll close it up there. And next week I'm going to be traveling, so I'm not going to have. I won't be online, but I will try to get Eric on, and maybe somebody else can come in as well and join him. But the plan is, at this point, I've been talking to Carity about Yahoo Access. So Carity was one of the main developers on Yahoo Access, and he said that that he could probably join us for an open hours talking about the product and about its use of Mojito and its use of YUI and some of the stuff that he's learned from that. So that is, at this point, that's the plan for next week. And of course, you can expect a YUI blog post for the invitation to that. And until then, to continue on this conversation, you know where to find us in the YUI IRC channel on Freenode and on the YUILibrary.com forums, or tweet us at YUILibrary. And with that, let's close up shop and everybody get back to work. It's a fantastic Thursday, so let's all be productive with the remaining hours that you have to be productive. Thanks again for joining us, Jay, and we